Hey, everybody, welcome to another show of Women Atheist Unloaded. And I am so excited to have KaRAYgeous on as my co host today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I am doing great. So, what I would like, just in case people don't know or know enough about you, just give us a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, so I am still, I guess, would be considered a baby atheist. I became an atheist about 2.5 years ago, but I was deconstructing for probably at least 5 years before then. I went to a really conservative Christian college, and by the end of it, I was just so soured by conservative evangelical Christianity that it started me on a journey to start seeking out what truth was. And but I'm really excited to hear the amazing stories about the guests that we have today, because it's a perspective that I cannot personally share. So I love learning about it. And I have just been getting more and more involved with with Tang and with producing. I'm also the producer for the Unholy Trinity with Queen of Heathens, KaRAYgeous, and Red Sage. I'm also helped produce this show, and I've got something else coming up in the works. So
Oh, that's exciting. To be announced, right?
Oh no, Cindy, we eat babies. Do you do like medium rare, like medium well? Like what temperature do you like?
Well, I personally like mine with a little bit of hot sauce on top. But anyway,
Oh yeah.
yeah. So I am this similar to you in that I'm not a cradle atheist. I'm definitely have had religious indoctrination through my life, both early on with my family, and then as I got older, searching and looking and having friends. So I'm really excited to jump into this. So, the first thing I want to do is introduce some of our guests. The first one I'm going to bring in, and I am probably going to butcher her name, so I apologize up front. Niki Aktipis, is that correct?
You know what? That's better than what my students call me. So yes, that was excellent.
I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do here? So you say your name, so I can make sure. I'll say Niki probably, but if you can.
Yeah, of course. Aktipis. So you were just like super, super close. Like I said, I hear all kinds of things every day. So like, I'm not even worried about it.
Is it Greek?
It is Greek. Definitely very Greek. And so is the first name.
Yes.
So thank you to my mom. My mom is not, my dad is. So she was just like, you get a Greek name.
That's right. Well, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I actually go by the pronouns they, them. I am a AFAB. Was assigned female at birth. That's what that means. I am the former board president of Kansas City Oasis, which is a secular-based community here in Kansas City. We have some all over the country and also up in Canada. And I am technically baptized a Greek Orthodox, but as my mom would tell you, she did that because she was poor and needed the money. But I was raised secular through and through. And that's still where I'm at. I've never found Jesus. I've never found anybody else, except I would show you. I have my Nick Cage Jesus shirt behind me, so he's my only deity in my life. So
awesome, great answer.
So you're in Kansas City?
I certainly am in Kansas City.
I'm in Springfield, so we can both be in misery together.
Well, I'm on the Kansas side, so
Oh,
but I'm close
okay.
enough to the line. I appreciate you, and you probably know people I know if you're in Springfield.
Probably.
It's such a small world, after
Mhm.
all. So, the next one I would like to introduce is Jan Shelley. Hey, Jan.
Hey,
Hi.
hi. Oh, I'm in St. Louis. I just wanted to say that right away. The system is so
Wow.
slow.
That's
Yeah.
All right.
Um, yeah,
So we have Missouri all the way around, don't we?
yeah, we do.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Jan.
Okay. So I was not raised with any standard religion or unstandard, I guess, really. And I have retired for a few years, which is like the best thing you could ever do in your whole life. Just do it as soon as you can. But let me think. Going back, I can say that I taught high school English for 4 years, just like my husband and my son. We're all 3 out out now, and in fact, I enjoyed teaching so much that I went to law school when I had a 15-month-old, and and it was less stressful, and, so Colin's now 34, but I was a public defender in St. Louis City for a couple of years. At the end, my clients had already received the death penalty, so I was doing mitigation and habeas work, some other things. And then for 17 years, I worked at the EEOC, which, if anybody knows about that, that's employment discrimination, federal government. So, I guess I could say one thing that I think is really not something that a lot of people who were raised religiously think about, which is that, well, my dad was a Catholic, his whole family. My husband's family was Catholic. My daughter married a guy from a Jesuit high school. So St. Louis is just chock full of Catholics. And but my parents were not religious. We didn't go to church except a little when we were young or every once in a while. But I honestly believe that I still felt indoctrination sounds like a strong word considering it wasn't going to church and so forth. But my parents were very Republican. They were very upper middle class. They came through the Depression, and all they really, really seemed to focus on for ethical questions was how much money will that allow me to have? How many country clubs? How exclusive can my life be? So, at least to me, third out of 4 children, I absolutely still feel like I went the way other way and haven't changed a bit. If anything, it just means now I'm the old lady with tennis shoes out at protests. And so, yeah, so my whole life has been that of a good leftist activist lawyer. And it is very different than what my parents would have envisioned. So it's interesting. It's kind of a different kind of indoctrination that I tried to get away from.
That's awesome. I could go on and talk about all kinds of other topics with you, but we do have an actual topic here, so I'll have
Yeah, I
to
know. I'm like,
make a
I have
note. Yeah,
80,000 questions now.
I know. I got to stick a pin in all of that because wow, that's awesome. I'm so glad that you're on, Jan. The next one that I'm going to introduce, we go from Jan to Jane. And Jane's been on before, and we had a really good time when she was on the last time. So, welcome, Jane. Can you talk a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Thanks for having me on again. Well, let's see. I am a ceramic artist. I currently live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've been here, oh my gosh, 12 years. But I am from Minneapolis, so, Midwest, still representing. And my family, my immediate family is all still in Minneapolis. So, religious-wise, I guess it's interesting because I actually was raised within Reform Judaism. I'm culturally Jewish, but Reform Judaism, at least in my household and the way we practiced, it's it's very open. You're encouraged to question everything. I never felt indoctrinated. I don't recall a time when I ever believed in a God. I have some interesting memories that might come up through some of the questions that get asked. But so it's a little bit different than just being raised with family who is all considers themselves secular and atheistic. But my mother, for example, she was raised Catholic and really rebelled against that. She moved away from her family in Milwaukee. She moved out to LA after she graduated from high school and just started reading all different religious texts. So she went through this whole sort of evolution of her thought about spirituality. And I feel like even though that was long before I was even present on this planet, that helped to influence the fact that our household was so open to, just think what you want to think, ask questions, we'll answer them. And if we don't know the answer, we'll say we don't know the answer,
And I think that's probably the thing that is the most frightening, I think, for a theist, if I had to guess, is being able to say, I don't know. That seems, at least in my experience, not having an answer for something and just saying, I don't know, is just, what? How can you not know? You have to have a foundation for all of this. That's a scary thing to admit, but it's also, I think, the most important thing to be able to admit.
That's really interesting because my mom is, like, on my mom's side, the entire family is Jewish, and my mom converted to Christianity when she was 18, but a lot of that still, like, stays with you. And so, like, even though I was raised Christian, I was always encouraged to ask questions, and like, that was not something that was, like, looked down on. Like, they really, like, encouraged that. And so I've always thought, like, even sometimes, like, my mom in church, like, when she would be having issues and she wouldn't understand why, someone would be like, well, but you're Jewish. Like, most people don't know how that impacts the way that you ask questions and present things. And most people within church just don't ask those questions. So it makes them uncomfortable. So it's really interesting. I'm so excited to, like, learn more about all of your experiences.
I completely agree with you. I think it is really, really cool. So the first thing I want to do, and I think I'm going to start with Niki on this, but it's for all of you. What do you think the term cradle atheist means? Why are we talking about this? Why is this an important topic to have?
Yeah, so interesting question. I often think about this because honestly, you can't get around religion in the United States, right? It doesn't matter if you're born into a secular household that doesn't go to church, or you're not baptized, or you don't have a specific flavor of religion you go to. For me, being a cradle atheist, I think it means that, at least for me anyways, that I was given the choice. So religion was never really talked about in my household. It was just me and my mom. My mom raised me. My dad went back to Greece when I was little, after I was born. And it was never really brought up. There was probably comments here and there of, like, oh, we're not religious. It was very obvious, like, that we didn't go to church, that I would be like, why are my friends not available on Sundays or during whenever? And to me, it just means that I had the opportunity to explore all of the options if I really wanted to. And mom wasn't really going to, be like, no, you can't do that. But at the end of the day, I'm still not religious. She didn't raise me religious, or spiritual, because I know some people who are cradle atheists becomes spiritual in that way. I know at some point I played with the idea of Jesus after my grandpa died. And I was like, oh, this is what you do, right? This is just a cultural thing that you do. It's not like a thing that I was super into. I made like a Jesus on a stick for his grave. And, but I feel like I just had more opportunities to explore stuff. And at the end of the day, I was like, well, I'm a scientist. This all doesn't line up. Good job, everybody, for doing you all. But I'm gonna stick with not wasting my Sundays somewhere boring.
So, what about you, Jane? What's your answer to that question? Oh, you're muted.
Obviously, just this is just for my personal answer. I don't know that I had ever really heard the term before, but I was that's I heard it, and I feel like that is because, like I mentioned before, I have no recollection of having any belief in a deity. I have no recollection of thinking I needed to pray or doing something like that. Even though I did, I actually went to a Jewish day school, private day school for kindergarten through 6th grade. So we had, brief services on Fridays, and I learned Hebrew for those years. I did have a bat mitzvah. But in our household too, we frequented the theater, and I was involved in theater stuff as a kid. So for me, that was all, it was all performance of one kind or another. I do remember seeing people in elementary school. I remember particularly like one student and one teacher who seemed to have this fervor. They seemed to be feeling something. And I was definitely not feeling whatever they were feeling, so there was always this like, okay, well, I guess something's going on for some of these people, but it's not happening for me. So, and then kind of like what Niki was saying, we were always encouraged to just seek stuff out for ourselves. My brother, in like his pre-teens, was like, I'm going to start going to this Unitarian church because I've got friends who go there and we're going to hang out, and it was like, all right, whatever, see what works for you.
I can understand that. How about you, Jan? How would you answer that question? What does cradle atheism mean to you?
Well, I was trying to think about that, and I think at my home it didn't seem to be as important. And honestly, there was a lot of censorious kind of activity from my parents as to what was okay. Especially, you got to understand, I was born in 1956, so a lot about what a woman can and can't do and how you dress and what you do was very, very central to everything. And I never did work well with that. But I can remember, and I think the good thing that came out of it was that as a kid, things would happen that other kids seemed to be able to deal with better or not deal with in my brain. So I'll just give an example. We had a high school, 700 kids in my graduating class, baby boomers, and one black kid, by the way. But so at some thing that we had to do in the gym and everybody had to go, it was there was a Christian element to it, and I can't remember what it was, but I do remember that I was the only one who felt compelled to walk out by myself and leave. And I got to tell you how many times I've stood up in front of judges or other people and had to take a stance that was pretty unpopular, and had to hear things in family law class like, oh, you guys are a bunch of feminazis, and things like that throughout my life. I think in some ways the fact that it bothered me that I was being indoctrinated with something that I didn't agree with, that I saw as I don't mean to offend anyone, but in my brain, it was non-thinking, it was patriarchal, it was not something I was going to accept. So I guess in some ways having to stand up like that by myself and do that was helpful. If you don't mind, I'll say one thing though. As a parent, what I thought of was my kids are now 34 and almost 30. So when they were growing up, they would have to deal with death of granddad or something. So what my husband and I did, because we never knew what to say about some things, is that we went to what's called the Ethical Society in St. Louis, which is actually pretty big here, and most people there are more or less humanist, I guess. And it was great in some ways because we had a group of parents who just sat and talked about, I didn't want my kids to feel that alone. I mean, I think it made me stronger, but I didn't want it to be something they had to deal with. So instead, my son goes to Northern Missouri College, and wow, is it conservative there, and has a big sign on his door, God-free zone, and just, social anxiety already. And yeah, that was him staking out his solitary spot there. So, but I think it does affect me more than I even had realized, honestly.
Well, that kind of brings up another kind of good question. And we kind of talked about this a little bit behind the scenes. For someone like me who had that religious indoctrination growing up and in my early adult life, I would have loved to have never had that. However, as a free thinker now, as a secular humanist now in the middle of a very conservative area, it's hard to not. I mean, it would be much easier if I just was like everybody else. So I'm curious, as women who have not, or non-binary. When I say women, I don't mean to exclude any non-binary. I just, it's kind of just out of habit. When I talk with you guys, I'm wondering, what would you have liked to have had some type of, not religious indoctrination, but maybe understand the other viewpoint from an actual first person perspective? Or do you think it was better that you didn't have all of that lined up? Was it harder? Was it easier, in your opinion? Let's see. How about Niki? We'll start with you.
So yeah, this is interesting because I think when I was younger, when I was really little, it was hard to cope with, just because, again, like, your friends disappear on Sundays, right? And so you're just like, well, what am I doing? But I know once I got into high school and I started having conversations with people about, not necessarily welcomed conversations, but when friends found out, their family doesn't go to church or whatever, or maybe comments that I made, people would often get like confrontational about, well, haven't you heard about creationism? And I'm like, well, I don't even know what that means. Like, that's not in my vocabulary. That's never been introduced to me. So I didn't have that opportunity to formulate a good response to that. I know as an adult, it's been difficult sometimes too, because my current partner, he is ex Pentecostal. And so what he'll talk to me about stuff that's like triggering to him, or, what happened in church, and like stuff that happens in church compared to like out in the rest of the universe, I'm not able to relate. And it gets difficult sometimes because I want to be empathetic and be like, I understand where you're coming from. But at the end of the day, I can't, like, I've not had that experience of coming out of religion. And I can empathize in a way of being like, yeah, man, that sucks. That sounds really traumatic. But I've only ever sat through a few church services, and I probably fell asleep, to be quite honest. So when we have those conversations, it's difficult for me because I'm like, well, I do know some of the Bible. I do know some other holy texts, but it's not from the perspective of like being in that world. So it's hard to communicate with him. And also specifically when I was part of Kansas City Oasis, we have a lot of folks that are ex Jehovah's Witnesses or ex whatever, that have come from really, really, really conservative religious backgrounds. That I'm like, I don't know what's triggering to you because I've not had this experience. So I don't know how to relate. And sometimes I get upset that I didn't have that experience, but also I'm just like, well, I've got a whole bunch of other traumas. So it's kind of nice not to have that extra layer of religious baggage on top of that.
That's a very valid point, because we all come to the table with our own experiences, with our own we look at the world through our own glasses, our rose-colored glasses or purple-colored glasses, whatever. Like I can't know what it is to be an African American male. I just can't. But I know what it's like, excuse me, to be, the woman experience. I know what it is to be a poor woman. I know what it is to be a middle class. I've had different experiences like that, and I've had different levels of trauma. We all come to the table with that. So that is an important thing to acknowledge. What about you, Jane? Do you feel that, the fact that you were not raised in this type of thing has been a positive or a negative experience, potentially?
Absolutely been a positive experience for me. And I think that as I've gotten older and met more people, it has only become more clear how positive an experience it was. The openness and, the sort of liberal, I feel like has become such a strange word these days, but I was taught from a young age that Republicans are evil. That's where my parents were at. You know what I'm saying? So very different from, for example, what Jan was saying earlier and things like that.
I'm so jealous.
And it's amazing. I mean, I feel like it over even just the last few years, it's become just more and more and more clear what a wonderful childhood situation I had. And I appreciate being able to have had that so much. And frankly, even though I am a cradle atheist, it was never really something I thought about. When I moved out of the house, at 17 or 18, I would go with my parents occasionally to have dinner with the family friends who were Jewish that we'd been seeing since I was a kid, kind of like my extended family in Minneapolis, because the rest of my extended family was elsewhere. But it's like traditional stuff, it's kind of like the way we celebrate Halloween now or Thanksgiving. It never felt like this spiritual or religious thing. It felt like seeing family friends. Now, I met my husband when I moved to New Mexico. He is ex-evangelical, and has significant religious trauma. And hearing his stories and watching him continue to grow and pull himself out of it, even over just the last 10 years, has really made it more important to me to acknowledge this part of who I am and this identity, part of my identity, and this trying to be more of an activist and just get voices out there that are saying things that aren't said every day, because we don't go knocking on people's doors, and we don't wear most of us don't always wear a little like A around our neck or something, like it's just not how we roll. But I think it's so important to show that we are present and that we are a growing population in the United States, at least, and in many areas throughout the world, and help those people who maybe are still on the fence or starting to question, to see that it's okay to question. And it's so important to hear the stories of people like Sunny and KaRAYgeous, who are like, I pulled myself out, I was there and I pulled myself out. My husband describes it as escaping a dungeon. And that's amazing, but I think it's so nice to hear, like, yeah, that's amazing. It's so admirable. I'm so happy for all of those people. And there's also the possibility that you were never exposed to that. And yes, maybe you had other traumas in other places of your life, but that can be avoided, and especially for people who like then go on to have children of their own and question, well, do I raise my kids with religion? You don't have to, or if you want some traditions or holidays, there's ways to do that without potentially harming your child's growing mind.
Yeah, that's one thing that I hear a lot from ex-Christians or ex-religious people is, well, I still send my kid to the same school, religious school that I went to, or I still go to church with them because I want them to at least understand the context of things, because it's so prevalent in this society. And what my counter to that is, you wouldn't take them into a room of pedophiles just so that they understand what pedophilia is in the world. And I'm not saying that that's the same. I mean, it's just an example.
No.
We wouldn't put our kids in a place where they are have the potential of falling into a harmful situation. You're not going to like put them in a room full of knives and say, "Hey, go in there and just have at it, and let's see if you can come out of that unscathed." You know what I'm saying? And so I've always had a bit of a problem with that, but that's because of my personal experiences. Theirs are different, and I think it's probably the hardest thing that any of us can do is to recognize that we make decisions. Um, we don't always make decisions that other people agree with, or that other people may think are potentially negative, but to us they feel positive, and that's difficult. It's like, I want to say, no, don't do that to your kids, but I think it's still important to recognize, people. Well, people are people; they do different things. Jen, what about you? Do you feel like growing up without any form of religiosity was a positive or a negative for you?
I don't think it's as clear as you would think. And the reason is because the answers my parents had were things like, and they've been gone for quite a while, but were things like, it's a dog eat dog world, you have to do it on your own. This is, somebody who didn't have enough food when he was a kid, literally. And both my parents lost their parents when they were in high school. And so they had a very rough life. And yet we ended up living in a very Republican and upper class neighborhood. So that's what I knew. So I felt like I really wasn't given any kind of morality that I could, or ethical tenets that I could live with. And I have to think sometimes that my whole life being kind of focused on social justice has something to do with reaction to the fact that their way of looking at things was sort of just the opposite. It has to be just you. You don't help, you can help an individual. It's okay if you help somebody, but you can't try to do that systemically. You can help a Black kid, but don't talk about racism. So there was a whole lot of that that I grew up with. And honestly, when I was very young, I went to some crazy place that I'm just remembering some of the experiences where I tried to figure out, oh, maybe this is something that will make me feel less anxious. I don't understand. I don't know what happens when you die. I don't know why I'm here, blah, blah, blah. So I went to like Christian churches, one where people were speaking in tongues and stuff. This was so foreign to me. I was just like, I don't understand. And thank God to me, thank no God, that wasn't where I ended up. But I think, so for my way of thinking of things, my kids went on, marches with me when they were young, and we still talk about decisions and how they, affect a lot of people, and why is it okay for us to live comfortably even though most people in the earth don't, and what can we do about it, and do we have a responsibility to do something about it? And my answer is yes, we do. So I I think that sometimes there's a difference maybe between telling your kids to ask questions, look at science, think rationally, critical thinking, because then I think you still do end up with the responsibility of taking care of each other. I think that's a critical thinking place to end up. Critical race theory. We have policies that are unfair, that are killing the earth. There are things that we need to deal with. So to me, that felt important to teach my kids, whereas my parents were more, hey, all I know is that this is how I make money and this is what I do, and that's it. There isn't anything else to talk about. So that was kind of almost a nihilistic kind of a way of looking at things. Maybe it's its own religion. But what was weird is that wasn't that unusual in, say, 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. They were very, they didn't care about whether somebody was gay. They didn't care about a lot of things. When I was very young, I married a factory worker guy. Now, what can I tell you? I told you I made some wild decisions because I didn't know what I was doing most of the time. And my dad was like, if you had married a middle-class black guy or Jewish or whatever, fine. But this was a poor white guy. So that's not okay. And it's just bizarre how not having, quote, religion still influenced their thinking and their values or lack thereof. So it's a little different. I don't know. I hope I'm explaining that well. It was just that we still came to very different conclusions.
Yeah, you're actually saying something that is so important that I think we can lose track of. The label atheist describes only one piece, one small piece of who we are.
Absolutely.
We just don't accept the proposition that a God exists. That's it. It doesn't talk about any, our politics or our social values or anything else. And I think sometimes we can lose track of that because we think when I first started going into atheism and I started searching it out, I mean, I wanted to figure things out, was right when a lot of the vocal and out there atheists on YouTube and other platforms were the anti SJWs. They were all, and I was like, wait a second, if this is what atheism is about, I don't want, what? Where's the community of people who are, who care about other people like you, Jan, and others? And then there was a resurgence. It was like it kind of flipped. But I think we can forget about that because now we have a lot of atheist activists who are also progressives and who care about things like the LGBTQIA plus population and care about equality, gender, equality, inclusion, and diversity, who care about things like reducing childhood trauma or environmental issues. And we have all of these things now, but it doesn't mean that is what being an atheist is. It just means that I'm an atheist and I value all these things, because you can also be an atheist and be a far right Republican. I just think that they have a much harder time than probably I do. I couldn't even imagine. KaRAYgeous, I wanted to ask you, neither of us have the experiences of the rest of us.
Mhm.
Do you wish that you had not been indoctrinated in religion, or are you kind of glad that at least you had something, kind of like what Jan was saying, maybe there was a sense of morality that you had at first, or I don't know, just is there, where do you fall on this?
So I would say very fortunate, because for the most part, like, the church that I grew up in was a very like liberal hippie church. Like, we always had, like, there was one person who was never wearing, like, who never wore shoes, and like my pastor would regularly come out of his office with like tears, like streaks down his cheek, and being like, I just had the most amazing God experience to a U2 song. And like, that was like a Tuesday for us. Like, we just expected it. So there's a lot of, like, I would say, within some of the people who have deconstructed from like evangelical Christianity, fundamental Christianity, they have a lot more religious trauma that they're having to uncouple. I would say for me, the biggest I would say, like, regrets or like areas of resentment that I have are things about like purity culture that I'm having to deconstruct. I shared on the last episode that I was on that just back in June, I discovered that I'm bi for the first time. And, while I was deep in that purity culture and that indoctrination, it's not like now I can look back and I can go, oh, obviously, like, that's what was going on. But at the time, I was so shut down to that being a possibility, because what I had been taught was that homosexuality was a sin. So even though I, as an ally, like, even when I was a Christian, I was like, hey, like, I'm going to serve God and I'm going to love him, but I don't agree with this. I think that we have to love people as if they are people. And if God decides to hold me accountable for that in heaven, then he's going to have to do that, because I love people more than I like being right. And, and I knew that that was not like a normal stance as a Christian, and that was a big part of when I did go to college, and I went to a conservative Christian college, and suddenly I was introduced to essentially how the rest of Christianity was run. I was like, this is horrible. I don't want to be associated with any of that. So yeah, I have a friend, Genevieve, who is a Cradle atheist, and she'll just be like sharing some of her experiences and some of the mindsets that she had growing up, and like how much like I'm having to learn some of the basic fundamentals about science and evolution because I wasn't taught it, because even my, curriculum in school, being in like the buckle of the Bible Belt, has been impacted by the fact that that it's, so culturally Christian here. It's like the city of churches here. Some of the questions I have for you guys is kind of a two-parter question. Is how was religion explained or like introduced to you as a kid? And then what was the definitive moment that you knew what atheism was and you decided you were an atheist growing up? And so then I'll start with reverse order. Jan, why don't you?
That's interesting. Here's all I remember about religion. I remember when I was really young, we were always getting to this huge Catholic church late, but we did go every once in a while on Sunday. So we had to stand, and that was really uncomfortable. Plus, the guy was talking in a foreign language and putting the stuff out. My husband will know all this stuff. He's a lapsed Catholic, but the fire. I don't know what it was. They walked down the aisle and they had funny outfits and all that. And so I remember that part of it, but then we never really went anymore. And I did remember my mom thought it was funny to just say she was all different religions when we'd ask her. So I don't know. My parents had a weird sense of humor, which was the one thing we shared. But my dad would say things like, oh, all I know is I had those hitting the punching nuns and all this kind of stuff. So he had Catholic school up until I think even went to Villanova for a year or so. And just did not have a lot of good things to say, did not have a lot of good memories about it. So it wasn't ever presented like something, that looked all that attractive in the first place. As far as atheism, I think it was an evolution. I think that, it was so inculcated. And to me, I honestly don't think it makes sense. I'm not saying people aren't, but I don't think it makes sense to come to the conclusion that you are personally responsible for your life and that each human has value and not be an atheist. I think all that makes sense together to me. So, social justice, environmental love of nature, all that, it all seems to be one in my mind. And that's where it all came from. It wasn't separate. But I guess I would say I would kind of walk around saying I was an agnostic because you know what? Here's the thing. It was never important to me to talk about God or not God. It just wasn't. I never cared. And so what was always important to me, not my family and not my friends necessarily, was to every single solitary day be sure that you were doing something that was helping people and not harming people, and helping the earth and not harming it. So I'm not even sure. Theism isn't the central part of anything for me. It's, yeah, I don't believe in God, but that's just one thing, part of who I am and what I believe. I believe a lot of positive things. God, negative, everything else kind of positive. So yeah, I don't know. It wasn't as important to me. And I think part of that was because it wasn't wildly Christian or religious where I was. If I had to walk around saying, if everybody was saying to me, oh, God says you have to do this or don't do that, then maybe that would become really important for me to say, who's this God guy? What is that about? I don't get it. I don't believe this. explain what he looks like, where does he live, what does he wear. Why is it a he? That was the first thing I remember. No way, no how was it a he in my brain. Never, never, ever. I mean, I knew I was the one who got pregnant. I was the one who gave my babies milk when they needed it. Forget this. So that was just not palpable in my brain. So for some
I
reason,
love that so much.
I just,
I
it
love
was
that
like,
so,
does this
so
make
much.
any sense that the creator is male? I just never got that. And so yeah, I don't think that was so important. I guess in some ways more, maybe I'm a humanist a little bit more, or a science loving person. And like I said, I just don't think theism in any form makes sense within that. Also, I don't think you take personal responsibility as much if you have a frickin' church telling you what to do. I don't get that. How do you just say, oh, we're not going to, we're going to tell women? If somebody told me that my daughter couldn't get an abortion because of their bizarre, crazy beliefs, we'd have a fight. And I'm a pacifist, but we'd have a fight, I mean, forget it. That's not where I get my shoulds or shouldn'ts. So I guess it never made sense to me. I don't know how to say it better than that, but it just, no.
I think, Jan, you are like, we're all going, hell yeah, sister, preach it. Preach it to us. Yeah, I think we all feel that way.
I really do. I don't know how anybody got that. And I've seen, you guys, some of the most wonderful people I've ever met. Like, I was really involved. I was the legal person for the NAACP in Florida when we lived there. We just moved back recently. And everyone I knew, it's the NAACP, right? Everyone was very, very Christian. And sometimes we could talk about it, but everyone came up to my husband and I. A, were one of the few white people there out of hundreds of people. And B, we were just sitting around not talking to many people. And they kept asking us, what's your church? What's your church? One thing I can say is almost 100% of those women were some of the most awesome women I will ever know in my life. And the fact that we didn't agree with each other at all in religion, in a way, just wasn't as important, if that makes sense to you guys. So yeah, I never was Christian, but I also, think life's pretty short. And if somebody's Christian, I can still hang with them if they're on the same wave otherwise.
Yeah. As long as they aren't like a bigoted person, like, yeah, I can hang with them. Jane, what about you?
Well, this is kind of a hard question for me. I guess I want to just touch back on my exposure to religion. Obviously, like I said, I was raised in religion, but I was never told, it was never like anything that was forced upon me. And I do think, again, like having my mother having, all these different religious texts on her bookshelves. She's an avid reader. So we had thousands of books in the house. So there was never this idea that there's one book that's superior to all the other books, that was, and it was always about exploration and learning. And I do think that is very culturally Jewish as well. And you do find there are a lot of atheist Jews out there, I think for a number of reasons. But then you also asked, like, when did I decide, okay, I am an atheist, And that one is also really hard for me because I never believed. And so I never felt like I had to counter that and like decide. I do think I started to become a little more vocal about it in my small introverted way over the last decade or so, because it's felt more urgent to me due to, again, where I'm living now, what's happening in our society now. It does feel more urgent and vital to be talking about these things more. But one thing I do remember as a kid is I had friends, who were of different religious backgrounds. And I remember one friend trying to explain the Trinity to me and how the Trinity was like, but there's still just one. And it made no sense. It made no sense, right? And I'm just a kid, but I was like, this is obviously just made up bullshit. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So so that was really key. And then there was another thing in elementary school. In Judaism, the Jewish people are supposed to be the chosen people, God's chosen people, and that really rubbed me the wrong way. Again, this is elementary school, so I'm sure I wasn't having really clear thoughts about these things, but I knew that I didn't feel comfortable thinking I was more special than someone else because of some random luck of where and who I was born to. That was it felt awful to me to try to think that way. It didn't make sense to me. It felt exclusionary and wrong. And that's part of, I think, what sort of kept me even within that school and religious culture, kept me separate from it, because I was like, okay, well, you guys, I know you think this and I don't think that. So we are already like a little bit on different pages here.
What about you, Niki?
Yeah, well, I've been thinking about it as I've been listening here. And first off, I want to say, KaRAYgeous, if you ever need any science lessons, I am a trained scientist through and through. I have a master's in conservation biology. So listen, hit me up.
Absolutely.
I also teach high school biology and zoology. So I'm your guy.
Awesome. I've been really watching a lot of on YouTube, Gut Sick Gibbon. I don't know if you follow her channel, but she's fantastic. And then Forrest Valkai, a renegade science teacher.
Okay.
But I would love to, yes, we will definitely have to exchange information.
And check out Scientist Mel too. She's awesome.
Okay. Yeah.
I will find all of those because first off, I look for stuff for my kids, and this is a sidetrack, and I'm sorry, but I had to. But it ties in here. So, my first experiences with religion were, I said earlier that I'm baptized Greek Orthodox. Neither one of my parents are practicing of anything. My dad is not Greek Orthodox. He's probably also baptized, but he identifies as an atheist. And so my first experiences were with religion in general were going to church with my godparents because my mom wanted me to have a connection to Greek culture. It was the most boring thing on the face of earth because one, I didn't know any Greek, and two, some guys up there telling me the same thing as Jane was saying about the Holy Trinity. I'm like, what do you mean? This makes no sense. You said you're monotheistic, but yet there are three of these dudes running around loose. And it honestly still doesn't make sense to me, right? So those were my early experiences. Like in college, I made some friends while working at one of the dining halls, and I really wanted to be friends with them, and they were in Christian Youth Alliance or something, and I would go to their parties because I was like, I'm basically a stray cat, hungry college student. And
food.
Pretty much, like, if you've got food, listen, I'm down as long as you've got food. That's it. And that still happens today, right? And like I would go to, I think I went to one of their church services around Christmas, and I was like, "Oh, why are you here, Niki? This is too much Jesus." But you're hungry and you want friends. So those were some of my earlier experiences. In the past couple years, my partner has taken me to his former church. We went to his 10th high school reunion not too long ago. And he's like, I just want to show you what I was raised with. And we went, and it was people up there preaching about their missions trips and how other countries were like, oh, they have no cultural food taste. And I'm like, I'm so glad I missed out on all of this. This is yikes. Because that's not how I was, like, my dad was an immigrant. And for like hearing other people, like religious people saying that, oh yeah, I'm a missionary, I'm going to go save these people. Their food is terrible. They don't know any English. I'm like, y'all y'all rude.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
And-
brazen with their colonization.
yeah, it's
Yes.
it was mind blowing. And like some of them were like, oh yeah, we're not technically supposed to be there as missionaries, so we're sneaking in through other means. And I'm like,
Lying. Like you're lying.
yeah, ew.
You're lying and breaking the law because you're so moral. Okay.
Yeah. It's like, oh well, I can do whatever I want because I'm, whatever. And so now I'm older and I'm just like, y'all just gross. Stop. But I always thought too, because when I first learned about monotheism versus polytheism, because my dad would send me these beautiful hand-drawn books about Greek mythology, and polytheism makes far more sense to me than monotheism. If anything's going to make sense, that's it, because there's local gods taking over crops, or somebody was having sex with the wrong like a god's whatever, and the god is mad. I'm like, this makes more sense, right? Not that it makes that's not what I'm up to anyways, but I'm like, Christianity, all this other stuff doesn't make sense. Why would there just be one individual hanging out over all of this? There would be multiple, right? Like the earth is large, universe is large. So I just kind of fell into atheism. It wasn't until probably the end of college when my mom was really trying to put herself out there in the world, because she was very protected in her atheism when I was growing up, and it was more or less for our protection as a single mom raising a only child. It wasn't until college that she came out, like my college years, that she came out, and I was like, well, I'm just along for the ride. Like, why not? And I mean, here I am now as an atheist and a humanist, teaching in the Bible Belt, lovely Midwest going on. And I'm a scientist. Like, I'm a scientist first, also, before I became a teacher. And it made more sense to be an atheist, and it makes more sense to be a humanist, because I think it was mentioned earlier. It's like, well, the people are here and now. Why, like, if there's a God that they're going to judge me for doing the stuff I'm doing here, isn't that really their fault? They, so I will stick it out to the end being an atheist. I'd rather help other humans than worry about where I'm going to end up later on. Because who knows? And I personally, am I going to care? Probably not.
So what was the first stage that you read the Bible as a cradle atheist? And what was the thing that where you were just like, I cannot believe that people believe this?
Me personally, I personally have read bits and pieces over the years. And I think the whole thing of the logistics of the 7 days was just, that first right out of the gate, 7 days. Listen, no. That's not working for me, even as a metaphor of because some people make the metaphor of, oh, well, it means this many millennia. I'm like, no, that's y'all trying to apologize for that. And it's not happening for me.
As a scientist, I cannot imagine if I didn't know about science. So as a small child, at 4, when my parents are being yeah, and then the whole earth flooded and all of the animals, and you're like, but what about the dinosaurs? If I had actually been taught about science fundamentally as a child and then was introduced to some of these mythologies. But yeah, I can't imagine.
I mean, I tell people all the time, I don't know if Jane and Jan ever experienced this. Maybe you guys were probably adults by the time this started happening with infomercial. They weren't infomercials, but they were infomercial length. Oh goodness, flat earth creationists would get on the TV and be like, well, is carbon dating real? And as a little kid, I was like, oh shit. Like, the TV is telling me that carbon dating is terrible. And like, my mom, thank goodness she was who she was, because she was like, that's Niki, stop. But I would have been drawn in if I would have had a different parent than I had my mom. But I was like, the TV just told me that carbon dating is incorrect. My mom's like, stop, just what? Turn that off. And I'm like, oh, okay.
I know it's getting a little bit past the hour, and I want to be very respectful of your time, but I would like to ask one more question, if you guys don't mind staying over just a little bit, because I really feel like this is something that people who are theists who might be watching would ask, and this is one of the questions that keeps coming up. If you are not born and raised in some type of religious tradition, then where in the world can you get your morals from? We've talked a lot today about morals from the very beginning on, but we haven't talked about where we have gotten our morals if we don't have that religious foundation. We did talk, like Jan had talked about, how even though her parents were atheist, they didn't necessarily have the same type of morals and values that she did. They were very much concerned about, getting what they could, and moving up that social ladder. But you have a totally different sense of morality and ethics and morals than they did. So where do you get your morals without a Christian foundation or a God to tell you what your morals are? And of course, then I wonder, how do we even know what God wants from that? But anyway, let's ask that question. Jen, I'd really love to start with you because of your unique perspective.
As you're saying this, I'm thinking, I honestly, I don't know if I have an answer to it, but every time that I came to some Oprah aha moment, it was through experiences. And the first ones that were so obvious to me, and when I say, I mean, they were as impactful as any religious experience I've ever heard, was when I was a public defender. And I saw these kids who had had the shittiest life a human being could have in our country. They didn't have money. They didn't have anything. They lived down the street from me, literally. I mean, 20 minutes, half hour away from where I live, where I grew up. And because of a happenstance of race and poverty, they were en masse. Every week we would have 200 black men in court being accused of crimes. And I knew that there were bigger crimes being committed out there than stealing from Walmart. I knew that, some of the pollution my dad's company put into the rivers was really going to damage more people. So every time I would come into something that challenged what I had growing up, where I grew up, I feel like that's how I started to maybe reinforce some of the things that I believed that, but also to have the personal experience was really important. Um, when I retired, I actually ended up doing a whole lot more than when I was working. So I went down to Matamoros in Mexico because we had a bunch of people we kept out of this country, and there were babies there in tents in the middle of, the cartels walking around, and everybody wanted abogados, lawyers. So we were trying to talk to people and help them. But it's so easy to have whatever morality you have if you just isolate yourself with everybody else who's comfortable, who's complacent, who's saying, and I mean, honestly, some of the best atheists can do this as well. So I'm not sure if just being an atheist was enough. But for me, it came through learning by people who are being affected by what I do and what I don't do and what the country I live in does. And I just think that working with incarcerated women, I got to know some things about how trauma, oh my God, that these women went through and how it affected their life. And I can say that, like, I can see my sister, and there are ways that you can avoid all of this. You can avoid learning what's the consequences of our inactions or our actions. But when I was in Florida and we went to what's called UUs, Unitarians, I guess, we had a small group of folks, and we were talking about, what do we believe and why do we believe it? And we all, I think, came to the conclusion that this is one tiny bit of a huge bunch of universes, that we are so insignificant. But everything we do, that's going to sound crazy, but what we do does have significance, and we have to figure that out individually. There is no, I don't know, I just consider it like the sort of paper mache. I mean, it's not real. There is no persona. There's no force out there that's going to tell me what it seems to tell a lot of people, which is, hey, go back home, be comfortable, don't worry about it, just pray, I guess. And so I think the morality comes from putting yourself out there and trying. I honestly kind of am more of an existentialist to a certain degree, in that I believe the process is very important. There's an essay, Camus, I think, that talks about Sisyphus being happy. In other words, we just keep having to roll the damn rock up the hill, not knowing if we're going to help somebody or not, but we have to keep trying to help. We have to. I mean, it's the only right decision I can think of. And by that, I mean that we have to make ourselves available to experience other people's lives, and to find a way within ourselves to keep strong. And it's really hard. The older I've gotten, the harder it is, honestly, to have the energy to keep trying. Because honestly, I don't think I've ever been successful. I was successful as a lawyer to bring into for instance, and it felt great. The EEOC, we had a ruling, and it was something I worked on in the EEOC against most of the people I worked with, by the way, which they'd never admit, but it's true, on trying to get protections for trans people in employment discrimination. And there was a group of us from EEOC and Department of Justice, and a very small group, Lambda Legal. Anyway, so in this group, we were still pushing against what was the kind of normal, oh yeah, but this only means for race, and gender. Anyway, so we were pushing this, and we finally got it out of the EEOC. We got it in court. The Supreme Court says, yes, by God, you're right. We do protect trans people at work if they're being fired or whatever because of their status of being transgender. So that was like such a huge thing. And now I can't help but see, look what's going on. I mean, it's just like you have to just keep pushing the stupid rock, because I don't know if you do it because you think you're going to win. Maybe that's part of the morality, is you just have to keep trying it. Yeah, you just have to keep as humane as you can and keep trying to help other people. There's nothing else that I can think of it's that important to me. So
Excellent answer. Jane, what do you think about that?
It's interesting because, especially for Jan's story, it seems like so much of that is about her innate empathy towards others, right? And I feel like for me, that's similar. My morality came out of the fact that I care about other people, and I am occasionally able to, at least imagine what their situation might be like, and therefore, want to make it better in a way that I can, or even just notice that there is injustice happening in places, right? And want to do something to help fight that injustice. But you can't necessarily, okay, I want to, that's not what I want to say. You can teach empathy, right? I think you can, but I don't think it's easy. And I don't think it's easy to learn if you haven't been taught it from a young age, and it isn't something that came naturally to you. And I think that's potentially where some people get hung up on this idea of, without religion, there is no morality. Perhaps there wasn't, in their household or in their social spheres, there wasn't constant demonstrations of caring for others and thinking about people who are less fortunate than you, and remembering that there are other countries in the world, and if that wasn't there, then maybe they only did get, thou shalt and thou shalt not, and that's how they were taught morality. And really, I don't think thou shalt and thou shalt not are very effective tools. There's nuance in almost every situation, right? So thou shalt and thou shalt not, it's too binary. It doesn't give you the opportunity for that nuance. And I think so much of that comes down to education and experience, like Jan was saying, putting yourself into positions where you're exposed to people who are different than you, and trying to understand why they might be the way they are or think the way they think, and how those differences are wonderful and can be celebrated, or how those differences are potentially damaging to themselves or to people around them. But I never felt, religion always was mythology to me, so there was a question earlier about like when you read the Bible, and I was never taught it as something to believe. I was always like, it's a mythology book, just like any of the other mythology books. And so I never attached ethics or morality to religion. Those books are full of terrible situations, tragic and incredibly damaging situations, full of immorality and unethical choices. So why would you equate those things, even if you were a literalist of the Bible? So I think it's much more about empathy, and again, how do we get people to recognize empathy and become more empathic? I think if it's not innate, then it comes through education and healthy families and healthy communities.
Excellent answer. I like that. And you, Niki, what do you think?
I think at the end of the day, I got my sense of morality from my mom, and I know I sound like a big old mama's boy, because I kind of am. But just, she was a public school teacher as well in an underserved area, and it was just me and her most times, most days. And she would come home, talk about her experiences, about how her kids would get screwed on a daily basis out of resources or whatever. And I saw her put her own resources and her own emotions into it. And that was a big part of it for me, was seeing this person that I obviously care so much about, that I knew didn't go to church, or knew didn't follow some very specific something that was written down for their morality of caring about others, that it just came naturally that way. And our other close family members, like my aunts and my uncles, or I should say my aunt and my uncles, and we didn't like each other. Like, my family was a hot mess except for me and my mom, but seeing them be caring towards other animals, our family loved animals, like cats especially, and wildlife. Even though we hated each other, I still saw these people interact with other parts of the universe, other parts of the world that they cared deeply about, and they showed respect and empathy towards. And so I got the people part from mom, and the animal part from the rest of my family, and that's how my morality was built. And then in school, growing up, I would see people who needed friends, and I had this strong sense of like, this is stupid. Why are you not hanging out with this person? And I would, be like, well, this person needs company. They look like they need company. And, I'd build my friend base that way. And nobody ever was telling me that I had to do those things. Like, I was never pushed to be like, oh, well, you should befriend everybody, or you should do X, Y, and Z. It was like this, like the other two ladies are saying, it's this innate sense of empathy that really fostered my own morality. And even today, that's what's happening. I'll go to protests for like BLM or stuff for immigrants, and I've had other adults say, well, how could you go and do that? Like, why should it matter to you? I'm like, well, why the hell does it not matter to you? Like, these are literally other humans. Why are you being terrible? And like, I have these conversations with my kids at school. Often the conversation specifically with a couple of students of, oh, well, do you support LGBTQ, whatever? And I don't think they quite grasp who I am as a human. And or I'll just be like, well, why do you have those feelings? And there's like, well, it's just gross. And I said, well, they're humans too, right? And they think about it, because you can see it spinning in the back of their heads, but somebody somewhere has told them, like, it's not right to care about other people. So
or not care about a certain type of other people.
Or yeah,
that's the kind of stuff my mom would get in trouble for, is like her, like at her church there would be like a small group and people would be talking about homosexuality and they would just be going on about how horrible it is and what a sin, and like they don't understand it and everything, and like this would be going on for a while, and my mom would just raise her hand and go, so if one of the people here were gay and you guys didn't know it, how do you think that person would feel hearing everything you just said? And instead of like listening to what she asked, instead, like the church leaders would then be like, oh, so Stacy, you're struggling with homosexuality.
Oh.
And it's like, no, it's like, it's called empathy. Like, it's just like,
jeez. Yeah.
I think a lot of times, and I don't know how to exactly put this. I think a lot of times certain religions foster a sense of false morality. And I think people who have, because like you're saying, KaRAYgeous, like your mother, obviously her innate empathy was shining through that false sense of morality that was being fed to you and her. And I think sometimes we just need to listen to our innate sense of empathy and morality instead of getting it from others.
I love the answers that you guys gave. I will say, for me, I keep going back to what Tracy Harris used to say: we're a social species, and as such, we have evolved to want to take care of our species. And unfortunately, some of us have evolved to only care about certain ones within our species that we have, and we have othered others. That doesn't make, you know what I'm saying. We have divided ourselves up into tribes, and but our basic biology is to be empathetic and not just to our own species. We tend to also care about other species as well, because we can see that well-being is preferable to harm. And so it kind of encompasses everything that you guys have said. It's just, I've always loved how Tracy Harris would say that. And I know we've gone quite a bit over, but I felt like that conversation kind of needed to be had, because there's a lot of religious people that have this big thing about, if you don't have God, you can't have morality. And I just find that to be sad. It's just really sad that anyone would think you have to have a God belief to have any sense of morality, especially like Jane talked about, what's in the Bible is just atrocious. Why would you even?
Yes.
It doesn't make any sense. And KaRAYgeous, what about you with your feeling on this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think we have an evolutionary imperative to preserve our species. And so part of our evolutionary imperative is empathy. And so it's like, yeah, like, we evolve as species of, like, so the one that like I heard recently was like, you know, so if everybody agreed that child rape was okay, you know, like what, you know, like is that what you would do? And I said, like, would you agree with it? And I'm no, because like the Bible is the one that actually said child rape is okay. But if you know, even if it was at some point was socially acceptable for men to marry 13-year-olds. We now know studies. There have been studies to show the psychological damage that it does to a child to be molested, to be assaulted, to have it on an ongoing basis. So because we have those studies, we have that information now, and we have empathy, we can determine that damaging children is not okay. We don't need a Bible verse to tell us that, because there is a Bible verse that tells us that anyway. You know, so it's just us like connecting with other people, and like even if everybody was saying that like child rape was okay, because I have that information and I have empathy, I would not be jumping on that bandwagon, you know, like.
Yep.
But if those people really need the Bible and their false sense of what they think the morality is in the Bible, if that's what they need to not be murdering people or raping people, or you know, then okay, I guess keep Bible then, keep your idea of what it is. But a lot of times those people are incredibly hateful people who are being bigoted and are discriminating against others and are saying like, well, you're an animal and you don't have any morality. And I'm like, you're not even following your own commandments to love other people. So what good is your morality?
Oops, I just got through muting myself when I was trying not to. I think it was Cindy in the chat. I can't remember who it was now, and I pulled up something so I can't see. But someone said that last question could take up a whole show, and that's exactly right. But I do want to say that I felt like it was something that was really important, and I want to thank you guys for coming on the show and spending not just an hour, but we've gone, an hour and almost 25 minutes. So I want to tell you guys how much I appreciate that. This was such a great show. You guys are great, a great group of guests. And I already have so many other show ideas now that you guys can come on. Yeah, it's like you have an onion. You start peeling back these layers, and it's like, oh, I want to go here, I want to go there, and we could get up on all these awesome tangents. So I really want to do that. But what I would really like to do, first of all, is thank you guys. I'm getting over being sick, so I've had to mute myself a lot and cough, and so thank you guys if I haven't sounded my best. But what I would love for you guys to do is check out all the other shows that we have on the PSF, like Secular Soapbox, the Sandbox Debates, One Good Reason, The Crucible, which is my show on Monday nights. So please be sure and check out the other shows. If you like this content, be sure to hit the bell, subscribe, share, comment. The more you get this out and you comment and stuff, it helps our algorithms, which helps us to get this content out to you. If you'd really love to support us, try checking out our Patreon, and you can support us that way. But what I would like to say is, until we meet next time, just like I always say on The Crucible, remember to, oh, wait, before I stop, I almost forgot. I want to thank all the producers in the back. So KaRAYgeous, she does a lot of stuff in the back. So thank you. And now you're coming on here too. So it's like KaRAYgeous is all over the place. I don't know how you have enough time to get it all done, but thank you. I want to thank Wes and Josh, Phil, Kat, Jenna, all of those behind the scenes that help us. I want to thank all the other hosts on the Women Atheist Unloaded. And we could not do this without all of the people behind the scenes and without your support. So thank you guys. And until next time, remember to think critically. Good night, everybody.